Hello, today we're going to talk through how to complete how fully questions. So, how fully questions are asking you to take some information from a source and to suggest relevant information that the source has missed out. Now, there are three how fully questions in the final exam, and each one is worth 6 marks. So, that means you'll get one in each section, and obviously, in total, they're worth 18 marks overall. To answer the how fully questions, the first thing you need to do is to make a judgment. So, the question will ask you how fully does source A describe the conditions on the Middle Passage, or how fully does source A explain the reasons why it was difficult for slaves to resist on the Middle Passage? So you start off just by making a judgment. Source A quite fully describes the conditions on the Middle Passage, or source A quite fully explains the reasons why it was difficult to resist on the Middle Passage. If you don't include the judgment, you can only get 2 out of the 6 marks. So make sure you start off by making the judgment. The next thing you need to do is to find points in the source that answer the question and then directly quote them. And finally, you use your own knowledge to bring up points that answer the question that aren't mentioned in the source. So, how do we do that? So, quoting from the source is relatively straightforward. All you have to do is find a point in the source that directly answers the question. You must give the full quote, and there are always at least 3, now there's usually 4 points in each source, so if you can only find 2, have another look through the source, read it again, and just read it carefully and make sure it answers the question. And don't use ellipses or brackets or anything like that, just write out the full quote, which usually means writing out a full sentence. With the recall points, the things you have to remember are that they are simply points from your own knowledge, simply facts that you can remember that relate to the question. It can't be anything that's already been mentioned in the source. You're saying that the source doesn't mention this, so it can't be something that it mentions. It must directly answer the question. And it doesn't have to be extremely detailed. As long as you've got a reasonable point that is accurate and relevant to the question, you'll get a mark. So this is a question you could get in the exam. So you've got source A, which is about the Middle Passage, and it says, so it stench of the hold, the heat and the crowding, which meant that each had scarcely room to turn, almost suffocated us. There was sickness among the slaves, of which many died because of the rubbing of the chains and the filth of the lavatory buckets into which our children often fell. I was used to seeing sickness as a horrible disease had killed many of my tribe many years before. One day 2 of my wearied countrymen, who were chained together, preferring death to a life of misery, jumped into the sea. And the question is asking us, how fully does source A describe the conditions during the Middle Passage? So, the first sentence, which tells us about the stench of the hold and heating and overcrowding, is a relevant point because that's about a condition. The second sentence, which is about sickness and the sanitary conditions, is a point because it's relevant to the question. It's about the conditions on the Middle Passage. The third sentence, which is about things that happened in his life previously, is not a mark because it's not about the Middle Passage. And the final point, which is about how miserable people were on the Middle Passage, is a point because it makes reference to the conditions on the Middle Passage. So the points that you raise have to be relevant to the question. They have to answer the question. So for this one, recall points could include things like that slaves were forced to dance by the crew for exercise, that female slaves were sexually assaulted by the crew during the journey, that slaves were often kept away from anyone who spoke their language to prevent rebellions, that were kept in tight pack or loose pack, or that slaves were violently tortured if they tried to resist. So if the question is about the triangular trade began in Britain. Slave ships would be filled with manufactured goods such as guns, pots, clothes, or alcohol. These ships would sail to Africa to trade their goods for slaves. Britain, as an island nation, had a history of exploiting the oceans for trade. Many slaves were kept in slave factories on the coast of Africa so they could be easily sold when the ship arrived. So this is asking us, how fully does source C describe the triangular trade? So the first thing we need to do is to make a judgment. So source B quite fully describes the triangular trade. Then we need to quote from the source. Source B tells us slave ships would be filled with manufactured goods such as gun, pots, clothes, or alcohol, which is relevant because it's about the triangular trade. Source B also tells us these ships would sail to Africa to trade their goods for slaves, again relevant because it's about the triangular trade. And our final source point, source B also tells us many slaves were kept in slave factories on the coast of Africa so they could be easily sold when a ship arrived. So 3 relevant points that answer the question, and then we move on to our recall points. Source B fails to mention the journey from Africa to the Caribbean was around the Middle Passage and was a horrific experience for slaves. Again, it's about the triangular trade, so it's relevant. Source B also fails to mention the slaves are sold at slave auctions when they reach the Caribbean. Again, another factor about the point of the triangle. And source B also fails to mention that slave ships would be filled with sugar, cotton, or tobacco for the return journey to Britain. So you can see, start off the judgment, 3 points from the source and 3 points from our own knowledge. Now, how fully questions are relatively straightforward. They are some of the easier marks, so you should be making sure that you understand how to complete these questions and in their entirety so that you can gain as many possible marks when you're setting these questions. Okay, in order to help you answer these questions, what I've done is I have created a few documents. So there are 4 practice questions on the document called How Fully Practice Questions. What I would like you to do is have a go answering the first one, so the source A one, using the How Fully worksheet, and you can see that there are explanations of exactly what you have to do with the answering structure there. So all you have to do is complete the sentence. So there's sentence starters here. So source A, so you make your judgment, and then content source A tells us, so it's just finding 3 quotes, and then recall, which is source A fails to mention, so 3 points that aren't in the source. And then once you've done that, have a go at marking it yourself. I've also put up a model answer. So that's basically the answer for the source A question. So have a go at completing that on the worksheet. Mark it yourself, see how well you've done. If you've made any mistakes or if there's any bits you need to improve, have a think about what you need to improve. If you're still confused, you can have a rewatch of the video, see if that helps you explain. If you're still confused after that, feel free to ask me any questions and I will do my best to answer them for you. Once you have a clear idea in your head, I would like you to have a go at one of the other questions, so either source B, source C, or source D question, and submit it to me so that I can mark it, and then I can give you some feedback on whether you have understood what you're meant to do or not, or whether there are areas that you need to improve. Now, as always, if you have any questions, anything that you're confused about, just send me a message. I'll do my best to answer it. If you want to do some more How Fully questions because you feel that you need to practice, then that's fine. As I say, there are 3 there. If you want to do more than one, that is totally fine. Or there are also past papers available on the SQA website. That is entirely fine. Whichever method you think will best help you to understand the How Fully question.